They're some of the biggest names in Hollywood. But did you know the Avengers cast didn't always come with superhero-sized paychecks? And no, Robert Downey Jr. didn't start with $75 million per film. In fact, one of the original Avengers took home less than $500,000 for their debut. But here's the real question. How much did it really cost to assemble Earth's mightiest heroes? Robert Downey Jr. set the tone for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and his bank account followed. From a comeback role in Iron Man to back-end deals that earned him over $400 million, Downey became the financial face of Marvel. But then came Chris Evans, who signed on as Captain America for just $300,000 in the beginning. His salary quickly multiplied as the universe exploded. Tom Holland, the youngest of the crew, swung into the MCU as Spider-Man with fresh energy and a modest starting salary. But after No Way Home dominated the box office, his earnings jumped into the tens of millions. Meanwhile, Chris Hemsworth bulked up as Thor and bulked up his bank account too, especially with later installments like Ragnarok and Love and Thunder, where he pulled in massive paydays and back-end bonuses. And don't forget Benedict Cumberbatch. The Doctor Strange star stepped into the multiverse with a solid starting salary, but his role quickly became central, and so did his paycheck. Then there's Mark Ruffalo, whose Hulk may not have had a solo film in the MCU, but that didn't stop him from collecting millions for every crossover appearance. And finally, Scarlett Johansson. As Black Widow, she became Marvel's highest paid actress, cashing in not just from her ensemble roles, but also from her long-awaited solo film and a back-end deal that made headlines worldwide. From humble beginnings to Hollywood titans, these 7 Avengers didn't just save the universe, they redefined blockbuster paydays. But which role brought in the biggest check? And who turned the MCU into their personal goldmine? Let's break it all down. Salaries, bonuses, box office hits, and every financial detail behind the actors who assembled one of the most profitable franchises in movie history. Tom Holland may be the youngest Avenger, but did you know his first paycheck as Spider-Man was barely enough to buy a new web shooter? And no, it wasn't a multi-million-dollar deal. In fact, his MCU debut came with a relatively modest salary compared to his co-stars. But here's the real question. How did Tom go from fresh-faced newcomer to one of the highest-paid stars in the Marvel Universe? When Holland first swung into action in Captain America: Civil War, he reportedly earned around $250,000. But it didn't take long for things to change. After the massive success of Spider-Man, Homecoming, Far From Home, and especially No Way Home, his earnings skyrocketed into the tens of millions, with back-end deals, bonuses, and lead billing to match. He became the face of a new generation of heroes, and the numbers prove it. From indie films to international blockbusters, Tom Holland's financial rise in Hollywood is nothing short of spectacular. So how much has Spider-Man really made him? Let's break down the budgets, box office numbers, and the paychecks that turned Tom Holland from neighbourhood hero into a global superstar. Chris Evans might be best known as Captain America, but did you know his first Marvel paycheck was anything but heroic? And no, it wasn't in the millions. In fact, Evans was hesitant to take the role at all, unsure if the commitment would be worth the risk. But here's the real question. How did he go from modest beginnings to one of the highest paid actors in the entire MCU? When Captain America, the first Avenger, hit theatres, Evans reportedly earned around $300,000. That number grew fast. With each new appearance, The Avengers, Winter Soldier, Civil War, his salary climbed higher, eventually reaching $15 million per film by Infinity War and Endgame. Throw in bonuses and back-end deals, and Evans walked away with an Avengers-sized fortune. From reluctant superhero to household name, Chris Evans didn't just lead the Avengers, he built a career around integrity, charisma, and box office power. And the numbers behind his rise? They're just as impressive as the shield he carried. Let's dive into the budgets, box office, and blockbuster paychecks that shaped the financial legacy of Captain America himself. Chris Hemsworth may be the god of thunder on screen, but did you know his first Thor paycheck barely cracked six figures? And no, it wasn't a lightning-sized salary. In fact, when he first picked up the hammer, Hemsworth was still relatively unknown in Hollywood, and Marvel wasn't handing out the big bucks just yet. But here's the real question. How did this Aussie actor transform a single superhero role into a multi-million-dollar empire? When Thor hit theatres in 2011, Hemsworth reportedly earned around $150,000. But with every sequel, team-up and crossover, from the Avengers to Ragnarok, his value soared. By the time Infinity War and Endgame rolled around, Hemsworth was pulling in over $15 million per film, not including bonuses. And with Thor, Love and Thunder, he proved he's one of the few original Avengers still carrying the franchise forward, and getting paid handsomely to do it. From soap opera beginnings to global box office powerhouse, Chris Hemsworth's journey proves that even gods have to climb their way to the top. Let's dive into the numbers, contracts and career-defining paydays that turned Thor into one of the most profitable heroes in the Marvel Universe. Benedict Cumberbatch wasn't always a household name, but did you know his leap into the Marvel Universe came with a paycheck far smaller than his later earnings? And no, he didn't enter the MCU as a billionaire or genius. He entered as a surgeon with a broken hand and a future worth millions. But here's the real question. How did Doctor Strange turn Cumberbatch into one of the MCU's highest paid stars? When he first donned the cloak of levitation in Doctor Strange, Cumberbatch reportedly earned around $3 to $4 million. But as his role expanded and became central to the multiverse storyline, that number jumped significantly. By the time Multiverse of Madness hit theatres, his salary had climbed to over $8 million, with back-end bonuses pushing that figure even higher. And with every crossover, from Infinity War to Spider-Man No Way Home, his presence became more essential and more expensive. From prestige drama to pop culture powerhouse, Benedict Cumberbatch brought gravity, charm, and serious box office clout to the MCU. Let's break down the budgets, earnings, and career-defining paydays that made this Sorcerer Supreme a financial force in the Marvel Universe. Mark Ruffalo didn't start the Marvel journey as the Hulk, but did you know his version of Bruce Banner ended up being one of the most profitable pivots in MCU history? And no, he didn't get a solo film like Iron Man or Thor. But despite that, Ruffalo still cashed in big across multiple ensemble blockbusters. So here's the real question. How did a recast role turn into a multi-million-dollar Marvel legacy? Ruffalo joined the MCU in The Avengers after Edward Norton stepped away from the role, reportedly earning between $2 to $3 million for his first outing. But that was just the beginning. With each crossover, Age of Ultron, Infinity War, Endgame, his paycheck climbed higher, ultimately reaching $10 to $15 million per film when you count bonuses. And even without a standalone Hulk movie, Ruffalo became a staple in the franchise, balancing emotional depth, comic relief, and serious star power. From indie drama darling to green-skinned powerhouse, Mark Ruffalo brought new life to the Hulk and major money to his Hollywood resume. Let's break down the surprising paychecks, box office totals, and behind-the-scenes deals that turned Marvel's quietest Avenger into one of its biggest financial forces. Scarlett Johansson made history as the MCU's first female Avenger, but did you know she was once paid significantly less than her co-stars? And no, it wasn't because she lacked screen time or star power. In fact, Black Widow quickly became one of the most essential characters in the entire franchise. But here's the real question. How did Scarlett go from an underpaid supporting role to the highest paid actress in the Marvel Universe? When she debuted in Iron Man 2, Johansson reportedly earned around $400,000. But by the time she reached Avengers Endgame, that number had grown to over $15 million per film. And for her long-awaited solo outing, Black Widow, she scored a $20 million paycheck, plus back-end bonuses that sparked headlines and even a public legal battle with Disney over streaming revenue. From spy thriller to superhero spotlight, Johansson not only broke ground for women in the MCU, she broke records at the box office and behind the scenes. Let's dive into the paychecks, box office numbers, and game-changing deals that turned Black Widow into a financial powerhouse, and Scarlett Johansson into one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. Scarlett Johansson didn't just play Black Widow, she became a symbol of power, persistence, and presence in a franchise. From her early days to headlining her own film with a multi-million-dollar payday, Johansson's financial journey mirrors her on-screen evolution. Underestimated at first, but unstoppable in the end. Over the course of more than a decade, she redefined what a female superhero could be, both in storytelling and in business. And while Black Widow may have marked the end of her MCU chapter, the legacy she leaves behind is worth far more than any paycheck. She helped open the door for more leading women in the genre and proved that blockbuster money doesn't have to come in a cape. From spy to Avenger to trailblazer, Scarlett Johansson didn't just make history, she cashed in while doing it. And now you know just how much. Mark Ruffalo may not have had a solo Hulk film in the MCU, but he carved out a career that proves, sometimes, less screen time doesn't mean less payoff. Quietly, steadily, and with every team up, he became a mainstay of the franchise, and one of its most reliable earners. While other Avengers came in with huge contracts or flashy standalone trilogies, Ruffalo brought depth, heart, and a calm intensity that balanced the chaos around him. And behind the scenes, his paychecks grew right alongside his performance, rising from a recast gamble to multi-million-dollar deals in Marvel's biggest blockbusters. From science labs to battlefields, Ruffalo's Hulk became more than just a rage monster. He became the emotional core of the Avengers. And while his story may not have always taken centre stage, the financial legacy he built speaks volumes. One thing's for sure. Mark Ruffalo didn't just play the Hulk, he turned it into one of the smartest career moves in modern Hollywood. Benedict Cumberbatch didn't just bring Doctor Strange to life, he brought a whole new dimension to the Marvel universe. With sharp wit, commanding presence, and just the right touch of arrogance, he became a key figure in the multiverse saga, and his paychecks followed suit. Starting with a modest salary compared to other Avengers, Cumberbatch quickly rose through the ranks. As his character's importance grew, so did his earnings, from early contracts to multi-million-dollar deals that placed him firmly among Marvel's top earners. And as Doctor Strange took centre stage in crossovers, like No Way Home and Multiverse of Madness, Cumberbatch proved he wasn't just a supporting act, he was essential to the future of the MCU. From London stages to global blockbusters, his journey is a masterclass in building long-term success through smart roles and sharp negotiations. At this point, the Sorcerer Supreme isn't just protecting realities, he's cashing in on them. And now you know exactly how much magic Benedict Cumberbatch brought, both on-screen and at the bank. Chris Hemsworth may have started as an underdog in the MCU, but he turned Thor into one of Marvel's most enduring and bankable heroes. From modest beginnings with his first solo film to leading multi-million-dollar epics like Ragnarok and Love and Thunder, Hemsworth built a financial empire right alongside his on-screen legacy. What makes his journey unique is how he evolved with the character. As Thor grew funnier, deeper, and more complex, so did Hemsworth's value to the franchise. With salaries climbing to $15 million and beyond, and with back-end bonuses in tow, he didn't just wield the hammer, he cashed in with every swing. And while many of the original Avengers have hung up their suits, Hemsworth remains one of the few still standing, ready to return whenever Marvel calls. He may be the god of thunder on screen, but behind the scenes, Chris Hemsworth proved he's a force of nature when it comes to Hollywood success. And now you know just how powerful his journey and his paycheck really was. Chris Evans didn't just carry the shield, he carried an entire era of the MCU. From humble beginnings with a $300,000 paycheck to commanding $15 million per film, his rise as Captain America wasn't just about heroism on screen, it was a masterclass in building long-term value in Hollywood. Over the years, Evans became the moral compass of the Avengers, anchoring the franchise with heart, strength, and a quiet intensity that made him unforgettable. And while Endgame marked the end of his arc in the MCU, it also capped off a financial journey that turned a risky contract into a blockbuster fortune. Beyond the Marvel films, he's leveraged that momentum into passion projects, directing, producing, and expanding his reach, proving he's more than just the man behind the mask. Chris Evans may have passed the shield, but he left behind a legacy carved in both cinematic history and serious earnings. And now you know exactly how much it paid to be the first Avenger. Robert Downey Jr. didn't just launch the MCU, he defined it. What started as a career comeback with a $500,000 paycheck in Iron Man evolved into one of the most lucrative roles in film history. By the time Endgame hit theatres, RDJ was pulling in $75 million per film with back-end bonuses that dwarfed every other Avengers' earnings. But his journey wasn't just about money, it was about redemption, reinvention, and rewriting what was possible in Hollywood. As Tony Stark, he delivered charisma, complexity, and a level of star power that turned a fledgling cinematic experiment into a global empire. And behind the scenes, he negotiated smarter than Stark himself, securing back-end points, performance incentives, and executive-level control that made him a legend in both acting and business. When Iron Man snapped his fingers in Endgame, it wasn't just the end of an era. It was the payoff of a billion-dollar arc that started with a risk and ended with history. Robert Downey Jr. wasn't just the face of the MCU, he was its foundation. And now you know exactly how much that legacy was worth. A team that started as a gamble in 2008 became the most profitable franchise in film history. But beyond the box office and billion-dollar milestones, the real story? It's the people behind the suits, the shields, the spells, and the smirks. Before the explosions, before the portal scenes, before the iconic poses on shattered battlefields, these were just actors taking a risk on a shared universe that no one had ever seen pulled off before. Studios weren't convinced, the audience wasn't guaranteed, and most of the actors, they weren't even household names yet. But they committed, they trained, they filmed for months at a time, sometimes years apart, carrying characters across trilogies and timelines with consistency, depth, and evolution. They laughed on set, lost sleep over stunt work, and built chemistry so real it transcended fiction. The MCU didn't just grow because of scripts or CGI, it grew because of them. They made us believe in gods and super soldiers, in sorcerers and spies, in geniuses and teenagers in spandex. But behind all the world-saving were artists, crafting stories, bonding over long shooting days, and slowly becoming part of something bigger than any one role or one film. This wasn't just about casting the right faces, it was about assembling the right hearts. And together, they didn't just build a franchise, they built a phenomenon. It all began with Robert Downey Jr., the comeback king. When Iron Man premiered, few predicted that RDJ, once considered a risky hire, would define an entire cinematic universe. As Tony Stark, he wasn't just a genius billionaire in fiction, he negotiated real-world deals that made him one of the highest-paid actors of all time. He was the foundation. Every Avenger that followed, every world saved, started with his arc reactor lighting up the screen. But what makes Downey's rise even more remarkable is where he came from. Before Marvel, his career was hanging by a thread. Studios had doubts, insurers had concerns, and yet Marvel bet everything on him. And he delivered one of the most charismatic, layered performances in blockbuster history. With every film, Stark evolved, from selfish arms dealer to reluctant hero to ultimate sacrifice. And RDJ carried that evolution with precision, humour, and emotional weight that anchored the entire MCU. Behind the scenes, his business instincts mirrored his character's brilliance. He restructured contracts, secured back-end deals, and turned each appearance into long-term equity in the franchise. By the end, Downey wasn't just starring in Marvel, he was partnering with it. When he exited the MCU, it wasn't just the end of a character, it felt like the end of an era. Because Iron Man wasn't just the first Avenger, he was the spark that made all of this possible. Then came Chris Evans. Reluctant at first, but once he picked up the shield, he became Steve Rogers, America's moral compass. Quiet, steady, unwavering. Evans brought soul to the spectacle and transformed a role that could have been cheesy into something timeless. And behind the scenes, his salary went from modest beginnings to $15 million a film. The man who said, "I can do this all day," wasn't just playing a hero, he lived it until the very end. And what made Evans so compelling was how he carried that weight. Rogers wasn't flashy. He didn't crack wise or command the room with ego. He led by example, through sacrifice, loyalty, and conviction. That quiet strength resonated with audiences across the globe. As each phase of the MCU unfolded, Evans became the emotional anchor, the Avenger who stood not just for justice, but for hope. Off-screen, Evans took that responsibility seriously, visiting children's hospitals in costume, speaking out about real-world issues. And when it came time to pass the shield, he didn't just exit the story, he completed it. A full arc, a perfect landing. Captain America's goodbye wasn't just a farewell to a character, it was a send-off to a legacy built on integrity, inside the script, and far beyond it. Mark Ruffalo wasn't the first Hulk, but he made the role his own. As Bruce Banner, he gave us science and soul, a character constantly at war with himself, and yet somehow the emotional anchor of the team. While others had flashy solo trilogies, Ruffalo quietly showed up in the biggest films and walked away with millions. No spotlight needed, just strength, in every sense. What made Ruffalo's Banner special wasn't just the transformation, it was the vulnerability. He didn't just fear the Hulk, he feared what he might do to the people he loved. That quiet torment gave the character emotional depth that grounded the chaos around him. In the middle of gods, super soldiers, and billionaires, Banner felt human, fragile, and real. Then came the evolution, Professor Hulk, a mind and a monster finally in balance. It wasn't just a visual change, it symbolized years of internal conflict finally resolved. And in that calm, Ruffalo delivered some of the most meaningful moments in the entire saga, reversing the snap, losing friends, and carrying guilt with quiet grace. Ruffalo's Hulk didn't need center stage to leave a massive impression. He proved you don't always have to roar the loudest to be one of the most powerful forces in the room. Then came the magic, Benedict Cumberbatch, Doctor Strange. Cool, calculated, mystical. He brought gravitas to the supernatural side of Marvel, and with every appearance, Infinity War, No Way Home, Multiverse of Madness, his role grew, and so did his paycheck. He didn't just open portals, he opened up the next phase of the franchise. And if the multiverse holds together, he's at the centre of it. Cumberbatch wasn't just another superhero in a cape. He brought a Shakespearean intensity to the role, blending arrogance, wisdom, and vulnerability into one of Marvel's most layered characters. Doctor Strange was never meant to be the loudest Avenger, but when the stakes were highest, he was the one holding the line, even when it meant watching 14 million futures where they lost. Off-screen, his journey mirrored that slow-burning rise. Starting with a modest $3 to $4 million for his debut, Cumberbatch's earnings quickly climbed into the $8 to $10 million range as he became central to the multiverse saga. And with Multiverse of Madness pulling in blockbuster numbers and setting up future arcs, Strange is no longer on the sidelines, he's steering the ship. Whether solving timelines, bending reality, or delivering some of the most iconic scenes in Marvel's recent history, Benedict Cumberbatch gave the MCU its mystical edge, and possibly its most important key to what comes next. And finally, Tom Holland, the heart of a new generation. Spider-Man brought innocence, energy, and teenage panic back to the screen. From a $250,000 debut in Civil War to back-end deals worth tens of millions, Holland's rise has been nothing short of meteoric. But more than the money, he felt real, vulnerable, awkward, heroic in the most human way. The kind of star who's just getting started. What made Holland different was that he wasn't trying to be a superhero, he was trying to survive one. Homework, heartbreak, pressure, loss. It all played out behind the mask, and fans connected with that. His chemistry with Downey Jr., his wide-eyed awe in the face of Avengers battles, and his devastating moments in No Way Home showed a range far beyond his age. Off-screen, Holland embraced the responsibility just as seriously. Whether it was meeting fans, doing press across the globe, or becoming one of Marvel's most bankable stars, he carried the Spider-Man torch with energy, humility, and charm. And with more appearances ahead, and talks of deeper creative involvement, it's clear. Tom Holland isn't just Marvel's friendly neighbourhood Spider-Man, he's their long-term investment. From sidekick to centrepiece, he's grown into the face of the next phase. And if the MCU's future swings high, it's because Holland helped build the web to hold it all together.